Today we're at the home of Major General Maj Bond, Moyne Coombe near Dorchester, and we've come really to sort of get his recollections and his memories about the evacuation of Tyneham back in 1943. So first of all, can you tell us, when did you first hear about the evacuation of your village?
After I got home, the war was still on, but I was a prisoner of war at the time in Germany, and we were liberated by the American armies and in due course flown home. And so I arrived at about 3 o'clock in the morning at Warren Station in 1945, 2 years, and I had no knowledge that the Tyneham had been taken over and evacuated at that time. And it wasn't until I was sleeping on the table in the waiting room on Warren Station, and my father arrived in the dark, of course, and he greeted me and put me in the car, and I said, "Where are we going?" And he was sort of thinking we were going sort of to Tyneham, and he said, "Oh, we're living in Corfe Castle," and that was the first I'd realised that they were there.
I mean, how did the evacuation affect your mother and father as people? What effect did it have upon them?
It deeply depressed them, and nevertheless, I think they settled down to do their level best to help the people who were equally deeply depressed and being evacuated from places where they'd been living for generations, for families. And being found, my mother in particular was kept very busy finding suitable places for them to be evacuated to.
Your mother was quite quite a lady, wasn't she? She was well respected in the neighbourhood in Tyneham.
She's an extremely sort of patriotic person. She'd joined up as a nurse for the First War and spent the First War in various hospitals in France and in Malta, and so she knew the really nasty side of war.
Is that why she was particularly keen to sort of allow the army? She understood why the army wanted to take over the area around Tyneham.
Yes, I think they both. I think my father used the word of resigned patriotism for his faith, and he wanted to do that. He understood that with the war, as it then was, coming to its climax in Normandy and so on, it was absolutely necessary to give all the tanks that we were able to train and provide the proper training area. But of course, he was told and formally told that when this is all over, you'll be able to go back. Yeah. Which was a confidence that he was really very, very upset.
Yeah. I mean, how did they take that decision by the Attlee government? I mean, what was their reaction as people to that?
It's difficult to say. I think it's probably true to say that the houses in which the people were evacuated to were twice as comfortable and running hot water, electric light, all that sort of thing. They'd never enjoyed in their lives. And so they probably, I think, were coming to realise that it was going to be difficult to get back. And of course their houses by then were looking rather as they are looking now, in ruins. The decision to stay on with the army was one which I think led to more damage. I think had they, as soon as the war was over, made efforts to let us go back, then I think there wouldn't have been the damage and the difficulty and the ill feeling that did arise.
So many of the villagers really probably saw it as a better life then, from that point of view, didn't they?
I think they probably did. They were always saying they wanted to, they would still love to go back, but I think they were fairly aged people too. I think that probably they were better off where they stayed where they were, but they always said they would love to have gone back.
Yeah. Do you think they should have preserved Tyneham House, made an effort with the house itself, the Tudor house?
This was a thing which enraged my father, because they actually went to some trouble to block up the entrances, the doors, and covered the windows with corrugated, and made it, I think it would have or could have lasted. The man who did this work said it would have lasted for a couple of years without anything being done to it. But as time went by, I'm sorry to say, it was broken into time and time again. There wasn't much looting going on, but an old house like that does require being kept up and everything. And it just fell down. Well, fell down, instead of putting it strongly, became quite unlivable. And
Was your father resentful for a long time after the evacuation?
I think he resentful is probably perhaps too strong. I think he was resentful at the lack of attention being paid to a promise that had been made to him. But he was bitterly unreconciled to being back in Tyneham. I think he understood in the end that it was not on, but he was unhappy about it.
Yeah. I mean, are you happy with what's happened? I mean, you've had to live with the situation in the valley now, but are you happy with what the army have done in Tyneham Valley? How they preserved it?
They claimed to have preserved it from the Bond family coming back to live there. They said that it was a feudal, which it was, situation, and that they, by keeping people out for a long time, were preserving it from being spoilt, and spoilt by, they said, caravans and all the rest of the thing, but none of the other places that were taken over by or rather retained by the landowners, the Mansells in Cambridge.
Yeah, exactly.
They maintained it, and it's still maintained as an extremely nice village.
No caravans in Kimmeridge, are there?
Yeah. No. So I think that was their excuse.
Military ecology, I've read somewhere, the word they used, that they were preserving this area.
Yes.
But I mean, what do you think of the valley as it stands now?
Well, I mean, it has its own magic, really, but a rather sorrowful background to me.
Why do you think people keep turning up well, we were there at the weekend, actually, and there were hundreds of people there again. I mean, how does that make you feel? Is it good to have the preserved, the people coming? It's still alive in that sense.
Oh, yes. No, I think it could be, and might have been possible to have developed it. For instance, there were no lavatories down at and the parking of the cars. My grandfather stopped the cars going down because he said it would keep the bay pleasanter if people had to walk for half a mile down to the bay, and that would thin out the people. And after all, for years after the war, the army refused to let anyone in. They said it was because there were possibly unexploded weapons and things about. But it didn't stop the officers and warrant officers pheasant shoot, taking part in beating through the covers in the woods. And they wanted, of course, to stay on. And I wouldn't blame them. But the army could have said, right, this is obviously no longer a place for tank firing. I mean, I don't know what the range of guns are now, but when my father and I were shooting rabbits before the war, and before any question of evacuation, and bits of shot or shell were coming over and so landing on the back of Gadcliffe and on those fields there. And so it was probably necessary to have moved then the range. But they could have made it into a training camp for something else. That didn't require heavy weapons being fired.
Well, you might say that I suppose the future of tanks these days is perhaps more limited, isn't there? With the use of tanks in warfare.
I think yes. I think it probably is. Yes.
What do you think of the action groups that were formed by people like Rodney Legg and joined by John Gould from the village?
I think that it was rather a natural reaction. And indeed, I was involved in it, not with Rodney Legg or John Gould, but I think they had the idea that they would be able to develop it, quite with what money, I don't know, in a suitable way. And we were really more concerned in retaining the sort of green atmosphere of the village.
Because they were fighting at the end for it to go to the National Trust, weren't they? They wanted National Trust ownership. How would you have felt about the National Trust taking it away from the army?
I wouldn't have objected at all, except that the National Trust would say yes, but the Bond family will have to endorse us for getting the whole place habitable. Right. And I certainly, my father certainly, having educated me at Eton, and my sister at a rather expensive girls' school, had no spare to spend on getting a place going.
So your thoughts on Tyneham, the village and the valley today are what when you sit and think back and look at it as it is today?
Mixed. I think mixed. Sad that what I knew the village as and the people as no longer exist, and that the houses in which they live, and that includes Tyneham House, are ruins, and that what is now there is the best we could make of it as a relic, but not really a live relic. I'm the only live relic left.
Well, I have to say, in the light of what we're trying to do with the Tyneham musical production, we will try to bring Tyneham back to life for you. Okay.